Have you ever heard of the actress who starred in one of the biggest cinematic failures of recent years, and then disappeared from theaters as if she had been banished? This is the story of Rachel Zegler, the young star who entered Hollywood with everything, but saw her dream turn into a nightmare before the eyes of the public and the industry. In March 2025, the long-awaited live-action version of Snow White premiered with a budget of over $250 million, a gigantic investment that, however, found no audience in movie theaters. The film didn't just fail, it simply vanished with empty lines and controversies that extended far beyond the screen. But what really happened behind the cameras? How did Rachel Zegler's career, until then pointed out as Hollywood's next big star, suffer devastating impact in a matter of weeks? And why did her troubled relationship with Disney Studio and political controversies threaten to transform a fairy tale into a worldwide nightmare? In this video, you'll learn about the backstage of this crisis, the controversies that marked the launch, and understand why Rachel ended up practically banished from theaters after the fiasco. Prepare yourself for a narrative that goes far beyond the headlines, revealing details that nobody told and that explain why this story is still far from over. Rachel Zegler emerged in Hollywood's scene as a promise. Young, talented, and charismatic, she conquered the main role in the new live-action version of Snow White, a project that promised to renew one of Disney's greatest classics. The investment: over $250 million. What was at stake? Nothing less than the rebirth of a fairy tale for a new generation. But what unfolded after the premiere was everything but a fairy tale. When the first Snow White sessions began, theaters seemed like ghosts, empty lines, scattered free seats, and the bitter sensation that the public simply didn't show up. It wasn't just a matter of bad numbers, it was an almost absolute disappearance. The film didn't fail, it vanished, leaving behind a trail of questions that nobody knew how to answer immediately. Rachel Zegler, the young actress who shortly before had been seen as Hollywood's bright future, felt the weight of this rejection on her skin and in real time. In a practically empty theater, she watched her own film crumble at the box office. There was no audience, no applause, only the silence of a cruel reality that few actors can face. To understand this scenario, we need to look beyond commercial failure. The truth is that Rachel Zegler's fall wasn't caused only by numbers, it was fed by a series of events that involved controversial statements, internal studio disputes, and an accumulation of tensions that made the actress's image crumble in an accelerated way. Everything started during the film's promotion phase. Rachel didn't spare words when criticizing the 1937 original classic, calling strange the story's focus on Snow White's passion for a prince that, in her view, bordered on harassment. Comments that, although understood as an attempt to modernize the narrative, sounded to many like disdain for the legacy of the very film she starred in. This posture already opened an internal crisis. Disney executives, despite being uncomfortable, chose not to interfere initially, perhaps betting that the buzz would eventually dissipate. But the situation escalated quickly when, at an official Disney event, Rachel ended her speech with an unexpected political declaration, inflaming the environment and putting the studio on maximum alert. The pressure on Rachel increased even more when her relationship with the co-star began showing evident cracks. While on cameras they sketched smiles, backstage tensions grew, fed by political disagreements and social media attacks. A conflict that, besides affecting the cast dynamics, became headlines and fed even more the negative image around the production. The actress was harshly criticized for her political opinions, which, according to internal sources, were expressed without due care, causing discomfort both for the team and Disney itself. The studio even hired a social media specialist to monitor and approve each of her posts in an attempt to control damage that already seemed irreversible. Meanwhile, the film continued its disastrous trajectory at the box office, The comparison with other Disney remakes only accentuated the failure. While The Little Mermaid earned almost $100 million on opening weekend, Snow White barely reached $43 million, even with a budget almost 3 times larger. And the invisible public, internet users, and critics didn't spare acid comments. Photos and videos of practically empty theaters went viral with memes and jokes about the audience's absence. Amid this scenario, an old video of Rachel went viral. In it, she said people would wait in lines to watch her films. What seemed like a promise of success became a reason for ironies and severe criticism. The financial disaster wasn't the only blow. Rumors about internal fights, filming problems, and inappropriate postures only increased the negative image around the actress. The apex of this chaos came when, after the presidential election, Rachel published a message on her social networks that left Disney executives in panic, generating an immediate containment reaction and appeasement attempt. Behind the scenes, the pressure was so intense that Mark Platt, the film's producer, had to travel to New York to personally reprimand the actress, asking her to moderate her statements to avoid more damage to the production. Even so, tensions continued, controversies multiplied, and the film sank deeper into box office and reputation. In a surprising move, after so many turbulences, Disney chose not to hold the traditional glamorous premiere. Instead, they preferred a discreet launch without the usual spotlights, as if already anticipating the imminent disaster. The publicity was timid, launch parties almost non-existent, and the film was delivered to the public with such low expectations that nobody dared bet on its success. What was seen in the following weeks was confirmation of the worst scenario. The film not only didn't recover the investment, but transformed into a headache for Disney, and for Rachel Zegler, the impact was devastating. From rising star, she became seen as a problem for the industry, and rumors about her removal from theaters began gaining strength to the point of being considered practically banished. This is the plot we're going to unravel here. What led Rachel Zegler from stardom to ostracism in record time. How a combination of failures, controversies, and personal choices transformed a promising career into a case study about the dangers of stardom in the social media era, and mainly what this reveals about Hollywood's backstage and the complex relationships between talent, public image, and politics. Since being announced as the new Snow White, Rachel Zegler was already walking on a tightrope between expectation and controversy. The actress's choice for such an iconic role stirred fans, critics, and industry sectors in ways few could predict. The discussion wasn't just about talent. It was about identity, representativeness, and the cultural battles that intensified more and more in Hollywood. Right after the announcement, a storm took shape on social networks. Many voices questioned the choice of a Latina actress to interpret the traditional white princess from fairy tales. Comparisons with other recent Disney controversies, like Halle Bailey's casting for Ariel in The Little Mermaid, were inevitable. Rachel, however, didn't stay silent before the criticism. In a series of posts, she firmly stated that she wouldn't change her skin for a role and challenged whoever insisted on an outdated concept of racial purity for fantasy characters. This firm position, although it garnered support from part of the public, also widened the battlefield. Insults, attacks, and inflamed debates began surrounding not only the actress, but the entire project. For many, Snow White stopped being just a film to transform into a symbol of a much larger cultural war. Amid this scenario, Rachel continued her trajectory, trying to maintain focus on work, but statements made in interviews only fueled the fire more. In one of them, she classified the 1,937 original plot as strange for romanticizing a relationship that today would be seen as problematic. The prince's obsession with the princess was a positioning aligned with an attempt to modernize the narrative, but the tone and form ended up sounding like a rejection of the classic loved by generations. Disney Studio was increasingly divided. On one hand, it wanted to be seen as progressive and modern, On the other, it faced a public that, for many, wasn't prepared for such a radical change or simply didn't want this change. The hesitation in controlling Rachel's speech ended up becoming a strategic error when she took the stage at the 2023 event for a speech that should celebrate the film. An unexpected political phrase at the end generated instant commotion. The reaction within the company was immediate. Executives rushed to contain the damage, trying to convince Rachel to moderate her public statements. Producer Mark Platt was sent on a delicate mission. Ask the actress to avoid mixing politics with the film's launch, which at any moment could transform into an irreparable crisis. Meanwhile, the relationship with co-star Gal Gadot, who played the stepmother, was far from what the camera showed. Backstage, tension was palpable. Different political views, reactions to controversial posts, and a veiled dispute made the partnership, which should be the film's strength, become another weak point. This toxic atmosphere didn't go unnoticed. Fans and journalists began scrutinizing every movement of the actresses, looking for clues of disagreements, social media comments, indirect responses, strategic silences. Everything fed a narrative that seemed more like a parallel drama to the film itself. The situation reached a point where, after the Oscar ceremony, Rachel made a comment that was interpreted as an indirect jab at Gal. By referring to her colleague as a professional pageant queen, she raised suspicions of rivalry and resentment, creating another reason for the public to turn against her. To complicate even more, Rachel's political position put her on a collision course with Gal's reality, who was Israeli and had served in that country's army. Rachel's publications and unilateral support of Palestine opened a wound difficult to heal, provoking a wave of criticism and even threats against Gal, forcing Disney to bear extra security to protect the actress. All this combination of internal and external crises created an unsustainable environment. Besides expensive filming and reshoots that weighed on the budget, Rachel's controversial posts became a snowball, undermining any hope of commercial success and staining the production's image. For the public, the impression was clear. The film was doomed from the beginning. What should be a celebration of children's fantasy became a stage for heated debates, endless controversies, and a spectacle of a young star's image destruction. While the dust hadn't settled yet, came the final blow. After the presidential elections, Rachel published an incendiary message on networks, wishing that Trump supporters would never find peace. The phrase not only shocked, but detonated what remained of support within the industry and among moderate fans, provoking a true collapse in Disney's confidence. Desperate executives tried to extinguish the fire, even restricting the actress's posts with help from social media specialists paid by the studio. Nothing seemed sufficient to contain the damage. The public response was implacable. Memes, jokes, and criticism spread across the internet, making it impossible to dissociate Rachel Zegler's name from the controversies surrounding the production. And within this whirlwind, the film premiered, but with an atmosphere already loaded with distrust and disgust. The consequences: resounding box office failure, empty theaters, and a career that began to be slowly isolated from the traditional circuit. Hollywood, which before received her with open arms, now began closing doors, not only because of financial disaster, but because of the trail of controversies she left along the way. The moment nobody wanted, but many awaited with apprehension, arrived. Snow White's premiere in movie theaters. After months of controversies, internal battles, and divided reactions, the public could finally decide. And what happened became a dark milestone in the industry. The first sessions were sepulchral silence. Theaters around the world exhibited an alarming reality. Empty chairs made failure palpable, making tangible the distance between expectations and what really happened. The public not only didn't respond, but seemed to have decided to completely ignore the film. Rachel Zegler, amid this scenario, lived an almost surreal moment. In a practically empty theater, she followed her premiere watching her own film. There were no fans, no applause, only the cold echo of silence. Videos leaked showing the actress, accompanied by few friends, trying to maintain spirit, laughing and applauding her own performance before a ghost environment. What for many could seem like a gesture of courage, for others was a sign of the delicate situation she found herself in, the protagonist of one of Hollywood's biggest failures, facing a public defeat as few stars dare. But the story didn't stop there. While commercial failure consolidated, the avalanche of criticism grew exponentially. The final numbers were cruel. With box office earnings far below expected, the film closed its first weekend with less than half of what Disney had invested. A painful mark for any production, even more for such an awaited one. For Rachel, the consequences were immediate. Doors that before seemed wide open began to close. Executives, agents, and even business partners began looking with suspicion. The fame that brought potential now carried a heavy shadow, that of someone difficult to control, who mixed politics and career in a way the market didn't tolerate. The social media repercussion was equally devastating. Memes and ironic comments went viral, highlighting not only the film's failure, but the actress's controversial trajectory. An old video in which Rachel declared that people would line up to watch her films circulated widely, now used to mock the cruel reality. The entertainment industry, which had long tried to show itself as progressive and open, saw in this episode an alert about the limits between personal positioning and professional responsibility. Rachel's public posture, especially her contundent political statements, became a breaking point with studios and producers. It didn't take long for rumors that Rachel would be banished from theaters to begin circulating. Although officially there was no formal communication, internal sources guaranteed that her image had been placed on a kind of blacklist, making access to big projects and opportunities difficult. Her case transformed into a paradigmatic example of the consequences that social networks and activism can have for careers in the entertainment industry. The junction of commercial failure with personal controversies made the path back to the spotlight almost impossible. Meanwhile, Disney continued trying to extinguish the crisis flames. The strategy became minimizing the actress's exposure, reducing her participation in public events and promotions, while seeking to rescue the brand's image with less controversial projects. Rachel, in turn, faced not only the loss of stardom, but also the emotional impact of an abruptly interrupted trajectory. Close friends report that she went through difficult moments, questioning her career's direction and the choices that put her in that place. It's a narrative that, however much it seems told about the brightness of spotlights, also has a human side of a young woman who tried to challenge standards but ended up paying too high a price. And this is the truth that many don't see when watching the spectacle of headlines. The weight of fame, the fragility of careers built on volatile bases, and the real price of exposure in times when each word can be decisive. At this moment, it becomes clear that Rachel Zegler's story is more than a film's failure. It's an alert about the challenges of navigating between art, politics, and public image, in a world where opinion can both build and destroy. The question that remains in the air is there space in Hollywood for authentic voices that carry strong opinions, or is the price of this authenticity simply being excluded? Rachel's journey hasn't ended yet, but the Snow White chapter and its impact on the actress's career will certainly be studied as one of the most emblematic cases of this new era in the entertainment industry. Rachel Zegler's story and Snow White's failure is a complex portrait of how talent, politics, and industry intertwine in unpredictable and often cruel ways. What began as a promise of success for a young star ended in a hard lesson about the limits that Hollywood imposes, directly or indirectly, on those who dare challenge the status quo. It wasn't just a film that sank at the box office, but a career that was relegated to the shadows. Between controversial statements, backstage tensions, and an implacable public reaction, Rachel saw her name linked to a monumental failure that led her to be practically banished from theaters. But this isn't a story about guilt or absolution. It's a narrative that shows us the complexities of today's entertainment world, where the balance between authenticity and professionalism is a thin line, and where one false step can cost too much. Rachel's case opens a necessary debate about what it means to be a public figure in the social media era, where political, personal, and artistic opinions mix and can define a trajectory. For the industry, there remains the challenge of rethinking how to deal with talents who carry causes and convictions. And for the public, reflection on how far we want our artists to be mirrors of society or mere carefully packaged products. In the end, Rachel Zegler isn't just the actress who starred in 2025's biggest failure. She's the symbol of a moment of transformation, tension, and uncertainty in Hollywood. And whether the industry will manage to adapt to this new reality, only time will tell. Meanwhile, the lesson that remains is clear. In the game of stars, brightness doesn't always last forever, and the price of fame can be higher than we imagine. If you found this breakdown as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories that the mainstream media won't tell you. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. What other Hollywood controversies or celebrity downfalls would you like me to cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments and I might just make it into our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.